Welcome to California in Focus. I'm Eliana Kernodle. California Governor Gavin Newsom's $40 billion fire aid request to Congress masks pre-fire budget woes. Joining me with more on this story is the Center Square's California reporter, Kenneth Schrupp. Kenneth, what is Governor Newsom asking for?
Hey, Eliana. Governor Newsom is asking for $40 billion from Congress to really fund a wide variety of recovery and response efforts, which also would really plaster over a lot of the weak finances at the state and municipal level that we've been covering here at the Center Square for some time. I also would like to point out that this funding request from Congress would ultimately have to be approved by the Republican-dominated Congress, so the Senate and House, and also signed off on by the president, unless he decides to veto the bill. This means that these requests ultimately are probably going to be a lot smaller once actually put into effect and voted upon by Congress, and may come with additional terms and additional conditions. Among these rules that have been discussed are some requirement for voter identification in the state, also for dismantling the California Coastal Commission, which famously denied an application for a launch expansion for Elon Musk's SpaceX at Vandenberg Air Force Base, citing his politics at the meeting where they decided not to expand his launch authorization. This does seem to suggest that Newsom will have to possibly give something up from this wish list, and as he seeks closer cooperation with Republican legislators.
What's in the $40 billion request?
There's a lot of money that's mostly going to go to local jurisdictions to give out on their own to NGOs and other service providers. They'll take a large administrative cut themselves. Or there's even money for something called low-income housing tax credits that will subsidize the creation of income-restricted, low-income housing in communities impacted by the fires. Now, this is especially contentious because in areas like the Palisades, this credit, which will be about $307,000 per home, that's enough money to start building units that otherwise would just lose money, and you're going to have people who otherwise probably would not have lived in that area now living there, because, this low income housing is set to people not based on the local income, but on the citywide income. So you'll see people, relatives citywide who are moving into the Palisades if this housing is built with this money there.
And he did request specifically some for water infrastructure as well, right?
Right. Yeah. He asked for about $500 million for water infrastructure. And this is interesting because, voters did approve a over $10 billion bond about a decade ago in 2014 that was supposed to fund water infrastructure throughout the state. So we would have water ready for situations like this, but not a single project has been completed despite voters approving those funds in 2014. So it's really unclear why this has to come from the federal budget. Our total state budget is going to be over $320 billion this year. What are we spending our money on is a question that a lot of people have. The Newsom budget proposed for this year would also withdraw $7 billion from reserves and lead to operating deficits that'll rise to about $30 billion within a few years. That's just not very sustainable. And it seems like this whole list of funds that he's asking for are really meant to bolster his budget without really directly addressing the cause of the wildfire getting so bad, which was really poor forest management at both the state and federal level, but mostly the state level.
So you mentioned local jurisdictions and NGOs getting this money. What specifically do you mean by that?
Right. So of that $40 billion, there are requests that some go directly to NGOs. These are non-governmental organizations that are private organizations that pretty much do government type services and get paid by the government to do them. So NGO is just the term that we use to describe them. This request includes $9.9 billion for, quote, community development block grants for disaster recovery from HUD, which, as we know, after Hurricane Katrina, really that money was just like fire hose money that went to nonprofits and local governments. We really don't know what that money is going to be spent on. It just has to be somehow justified by the organization that's giving out the money, which is either probably going to be the county or city government. It's going to be just a big goodie box for LA, which is broke. The city controller has been saying for months now that the city just doesn't have any money and will soon need to make a declaration of financial emergency to access the protected reserves it needs to use to keep making normal city payments without cutting any, further spending. Newsom also requested $240 million for childcare funding. And this funding, he said, is supposed to repair 42 childcare facilities, rebuild 33, and serve 1,458 kids, which averages about $3.2 million per facility. If you average that by kid, it's, I believe, over $100,000 a child. So this seems like a lot of money for childcare. We also do see about $4.3 billion for, quote, business grants, which the letter from Newsom says would support nonprofit organizations and create funding pools that would be, again, implemented by local jurisdictions, which will end up keeping some of that money for administrative costs for giving out those funds. This money could be given out as economic recovery grants, commercial acquisition funding, which means the government or nonprofits buying land, maybe even turning that into low-income housing, and what are called worker equity funds that can allow recipients to meet emergency needs like rent and childcare. So that money would probably go also to NGOs to give to people. But again, the city or county government would take a cut of that. NGOs would take a cut of that. And then some part of what's left would go to chosen groups of people.
Well, Kenneth, thank you for your insights on this story. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.